All right, welcome to the Courage to Act Educational Toolkit launch. I'm so excited to be here with you all. We're going to be talking about the Education and Training Toolkit today, addressing and preventing gender-based violence at post-secondary institutions. My name is Farah Khan, and I'm going to host you today. So the first thing I want to name is that we are so excited about this piece, but just a quick thing about language, this session and accessibility. So we do have closed captioning for it. So just enable that for yourself. It's really important. And also making sure that you can also listen in French. So for our French speaking audience, please do just click on the piece right down there and make sure that you know that you can listen in French and English. And this session will be recorded, so don't worry if you are wanting to take furious notes, but also want to listen. Sometimes it's just nice to listen. And the toolkit is now available on the Courage to Act website, so we're so excited about that. My name is again Farah Khan, and I'm so excited to be here. I am the director of Courage to Act and the executive director of Possibility Seeds. And Possibility Seeds is a leading project management and policy development social purpose enterprise. We work alongside our clients to create, connect, and cultivate gender justice. And right now we are leading the Courage to Act project. Courage to Act is, of course, a multi-year national initiative to address and prevent gender-based violence at post-secondary institutions. It builds on the key recommendations within the Possibilities Seeds Vital Report, Courage to Act, developing a national framework to address and prevent gender-based violence at post-secondary institutions. It's the first collaborative of its kind to bring together 170 GBV experts and advocates across Canada to address GBV on campus. Very exciting. And so today I am so excited about this national skill share that we're having. We're launching all these toolkits, and one of them that I feel very connected to is the education and training one, addressing and preventing gender-based violence at post-secondary institutions. This national scale share is back this year. This is another reiteration of the project as we go through it. And it's a new way to look at initiatives that are happening to address and prevent gender-based violence on campus. And a part of that is conversations about urgent issues in the movement, strategy to better address campus issues, as well as looking at how we can work together to collaboratively address them. We're supported by Caucus to do this work. We're really thankful for their support. These skills shares are recognized as a learning opportunity within Caucus, and our project is made possible by the generous funding by Women and Gender Equality Canada from the federal government. So thank you so much. So I want to just talk about also the land acknowledgement is really important to name for us right now. We are on Indigenous land that was unconsensually taken from Indigenous people and continues to stay sexual and gender-based violence perpetuated against Indigenous people. And for me, that is the truth that we have to carry on before we get to reconciliation. I want all of us to join in the conversation to think about how we can better support, amplify, listen, and implement the requests and the Truth and Reconciliation Report, as well as the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Report. We recognize that today's session is taking place across traditional territories of many Indigenous nations. We recognize that gender-based violence is just one form of colonization to marginalize and dispossess Indigenous peoples from their lands and waters. Our project really works hard to strive and honor this truth and actualizing justice for many communities across this country, including addressing missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We are talking about gender-based violence, and I know a lot of us, as someone who nerds out about this and maybe sends text messages to their partner or their friends and be like, have you read this article at 10 o'clock at night, because we're really excited about the work. This work can feel like our whole lives, which isn't always great or at all great. So we need to do some self-care. So make sure to check out our Courage to Act self-care page that we have and follow along with the Twitter hashtag GBV National Skillshare, or using I Have the Courage to Act to share with people the information that you are learning in the session and to celebrate the great work that's happening. So today we're having an amazing conversation with CJ Rowe and Jennifer Flood. Dr. CJ Rowe, by, of course, being one of the kindest people I know, is also the director of Simon Fraser University's Sexual Violence Support and Prevention Office. CJ is a past co-director of Courage to Act. I was so lucky to work with CJ, and the co-author of the Education and Training Toolkit. And then we have Jennifer Flood, Jennifer is one of the most brilliant people on education on campus that I know. Jennifer is a queer, mixed, Indigenous facilitator and advocate in campus sexual violence prevention and education. She's the education lead for Courage to Act, and we're so lucky to have her. And she's a co-author with CJ for the Education and Training Toolkit. I'm so excited to welcome both of them on. So maybe they can put their cameras on to join us. And then we're going to get into the conversation a little bit. But before we get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about Courage to Act, because just for people to know a little bit about what we are, we're a 7-person team. We've grown and we have a 29-person advisory committee. We've done 30 listening learning sessions, just a little about the report. And there were 300 listening learning participants to build out what we're doing here. So this conversation was really built on that. And out of that came 45 recommendations, and 60 representatives from post-secondary institutions came together to be like, how do we implement that? So that's how we're working on this together. The policy recommendations, policy and procedural recommendations were really clear, right? There were things like commitment to prevention education, a central office, mandatory training, an education task force or committee, partnerships and assessment and prevention education. So let's bring on the wonderful CJ Rowe and Jen, if you want to turn your cameras on, and we'll get started.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much, Farah, for getting us started. It's so good to be here. And I just wanted to begin by really saying I feel honored and just privileged and grateful to be in this space, and also to share the space with everybody who's tuned in today. I hope my Wi-Fi doesn't cut out. I was having some issues, so hopefully it holds for me. So as Farah mentioned, my name is Jenn. I use she, her pronouns. I have been kind of involved in prevention education work for about 7 years, and particularly on campuses, and working in like anti-gender-based violence prevention. What does that look like? What are some of the programs we're running? And I happen to work at 2 very large institutions in Ontario, at Humber College and University of Toronto. And both of those institutions were really complex. They had their own unique ecosystems and environments, and they both had multiple campuses. And so in these roles, I was actually the only full-time staff that was charged with doing prevention education work, which was a lot. And in those roles, I was really tasked with, curriculum design. I developed peer programs. We looked at, evidence-based work and how do we include that into our programming and our workshops. And also, I did a lot of consulting around institutional ways that we can develop strategies on prevention education, and some planning as well around that. And so in my roles, I was really curious about, at the time, 7 years ago, I was like, who else is doing this work? Who is engaged in this work in Ontario and also across the coast? And that led me to get involved with Farah and CJ in the National Advisory Committee. And really from there, I engaged with the Courage Act project. So I was really fortunate to be brought on to peer review the sections in the Courage Act report on gender-based violence prevention. And that was actually co-authored by authored by CJ, that section of the report. And I was able to go through and kind of give some of my feedback, which was exciting. And so from there, it was really obvious that there were so many gaps in prevention work, and there was so many recommendations that came from our listening and learning sessions, from the community across the country, and also from ourselves. And some of those recommendations were really clear to us. And so we kind of had a conversation, and a larger conversation around, like, what does this look like? We have all these amazing recommendations, but there's no tools to really support that. So that's kind of what led to the development of the toolkit and building the toolkit out and responding to those needs and those recommendations in the report. And I'm really excited now. I get to stay on with Possibility Seeds full time and continue that work and launching this incredible toolkit, which we'll get into in just a moment. So I'll pause it there and pass it over to you, CJ.
Well, if you can't hear the excitement in both Farah and Jen's voice, I hope you can tune into it. I'm beyond thrilled to be joining you today. And Farah, thanks so much for hosting this conversation. Thanks again to everybody who's tuned in. I always find it a bit daunting when you come in and then everyone starts joining and you see the numbers rise. My heart is beating in my ears. it's because of excitement and nerves. After 3 years of working on the Courage to Act project, it's exciting to be at this point. As far as mentioned, my name is CJ Rowe. My pronouns are they and them. And for over 2 decades, I've been working to develop education campaigns and research projects that critically engage with such issues as transgender justice, LGBTQ2S, youth leadership, gender-based violence prevention, and trauma-informed services. And for the last 15 years, I think I just realized that over the weekend, I've been engaged with this work within the post-secondary setting. While I have recently ended my tenure as co-director of the Courage to Act project, a big thank you to Farah and Jenn and Anuth and all of the team who've really supported me in making this transition. It's really exciting to be still involved with the toolkit and the launch and the next steps over the coming months. And I'm so excited to see how things unfurl and move and change. As far as mentioned, I am the director of SFU's Sexual Violence Support Prevention Office, where I have the great pleasure of working with a team of individuals to support those impacted by sexual violence, develop sexual violence education, prevention, learning opportunities, as well as operationalize policy and procedures, which for any of you who know me, I love operationalizing policy and procedures. I had no idea. I did. It's a lie. But we're really delighted to be sharing this toolkit with you all today.
I'm really excited to be with both of you with this because I think, this toolkit is something that's so needed in the conversation and something that I've seen both of you grow. This has also been years in the making, so that's what really excites me about it. So can you tell me a little bit of why it was important for you to create this project? Like what really got you excited, but also just what felt urgent too about it?
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to think about that question in a couple of different pieces. And the piece I want to address first is really what brought us to, I think in the first slide, Farah, you'd shared really what the first iteration of the project looked like, which was the writing of the Courage to Act report. And as we moved into the second and third year of the project, it was really important for us within the education and training team, and I think with all of the working groups, to really respond to the needs that were articulated in the listening learning sessions from the original project. So, I mean, we over the last 2 years really focused on those key suggestions, critical points that were brought up and really highlighted in the report. So the report outlines a number of key gaps and challenges. In this toolkit, we're really seeking to address as many of those as we can. As one of the co-authors of the report, it was really important for Jenn and I to be part of the next steps, like to invite Jenn in. And Farah, you and I had quite a lot of conversation around who we should be working alongside. And Jenn was a natural fit because of her work on the advisory committee within the first portion of the project, but also with I have to tell y'all, the substantive edits that Jenn provided to the education chapter were moving. It's been a while since I've been in that thorough of a conversation with someone. So for me, moving into the next 2 years alongside of Jenn was a natural fit because her critical eye and care, as well as the wealth of knowledge and experience that she brings to this work is really, really critical. So thanks, Jenn. I also wanted to share that one of the critical pieces for me in the development of this toolkit was that, thinking back to 15 years ago, we didn't have this kind of information or these really clear opportunities to network and then learn with each other, especially within the post-secondary setting, without going south of the border to connect with our American colleagues. So saying this, I also want to acknowledge that this work has been happening for decades, since post-secondary institutions existed. So I do also want to acknowledge the often unrecognized work that's done by those who do this work off the side of their desks. So here I'm talking about those who are incorporating GBV education into their research, into how they approach their work within post-secondary institutions, in their teaching, and how this all influences how they show up for survivors when they disclose. I'm going to leave the other important piece of that to Jenn, because I think, I really come from an experience of working as a staff person in post-secondary, and Jenn has a different path than I. So I'm going to pass it on to Jenn.
Oh, CJ, I'm such a big feeler, you know that, and I'm already getting emotional. It's been an emotional journey, folks, and bringing this all together. I think that it was really important for me when we were designing this project to acknowledge the role of student advocacy. And we know that students have been pushing for stronger prevention guidelines for literally decades. And that was important to me because I started off as a student. I was researching policy, I was researching programming, I was looking at what was available, like literally everywhere. And I really could have benefited from this toolkit. And I also think I can benefit from now, even in my role. And so I also want to acknowledge there's a few other pieces that were important. And one that I hear a lot and I've experienced is just the isolated and siloed nature of this work. It can be incredibly lonely and feeling like you're not able to get everything done, and you're feeling like you're the only person that has that understanding, that knowledge, and you're asked so many things that you have to do in your day-to-day. So I really wanted to build community with other people, get to know who was doing this work, and also like work together, build collaborative tools, create resources together. And I got to do that with this toolkit, and we really hope that we get to continue doing that as the years come. I really wanted this toolkit to also be a source of validation for people who do this work. I see you, we see you, we so acknowledge you. And we wanted that to reflect the ongoing realities for prevention educators while acknowledging there's so many challenges and barriers in these roles in this field. And I really wanted to incorporate, like all of us did, we wanted to incorporate stories from frontline folks that do this work. And so we've included those testimonials throughout, and we hope that really transcends. And the last thing I will say is really important was access, increasing access to this information that's free, that you don't have to download 7 links or you have to, pay or get a subscription for. And we know that people who are charged with this work often have different educational backgrounds. We have people who are in social work, who are in adult education, and not everybody has all the training and knowledge on prevention education, but yet they're expected to be the experts and know every single thing about prevention and provide frontline support. And so that can be really unrealistic and challenging, and we see that in a lot of roles. And so we wanted this toolkit to really create that baseline for folks and create those tools that are accessible to everybody. That sets them up for success as well and legitimizes this field, because we've been doing this for so long. My predecessors before me, this work's been happening for so long. Like, this is so overdue, and I'm so glad it's happening. But I want to acknowledge that it was important for us to also name that when we were chatting about it. Like, how frustrating is that we didn't have this?
It's thrilling to see both of you, speak from your heart, and also from, the experience you've had in terms of this work around the importance of laying down the foundation of these conversations and kind of gathering up different pieces to bring it together. I want to understand too within this, and I can see that, the chat is really lovely to see lots of people talking about already how excited they are about this. I want to just see a little bit of like a high level, because, we're almost halfway through this conversation of, high level conversation. What did you incorporate into the Courage to Act report? What did you include? What didn't you include? Why did you make the decision to make what you did?
I can get off mute there. Are we actually able to share the slides again, just briefly? And I can speak on the slide on policy and procedural recommendation. Perfect, wicked. So yeah, just touching on your question, Farah, after the Courage to Act report was released in 2019, we've mentioned there were so many recommendations, and folks can view those on the slide here. And there were so many findings that came out of it, and we're like, we can't do this all. We can't respond to this all. And so we met actually in person in 2019 in the fall to really shave it down and figure out, okay, what are we doing? What chunk is going here? Where are we pocketing things out? And what strategies are we going to move forward with? And so just on the next slide here, we were able to build out 6 different chapters And we continue to meet virtually as well, just to know there was a pandemic in between all of this, as folks know. So we had to kind of curb all of our in-person meetings and connect during different time zones. And, it was challenging, but it was also, there's a lot of joy in all of that. And so we ended up carving out these beautiful 6 chapters, and they're really designed to address those key findings. And I think we could have created more, and we could have kept writing. And I think at one point Farah came on and was like, okay, that's enough, no more writing. I'll let CJ go a little bit more into some of the things that we chose not to do and why. But I hope this provides folks with kind of a high level overview of what's in the chapters, and it's on our website as well. We'll get to that in a moment too.
Thanks for that, Jen. I mean, Jen and I did talk quite a lot about how we were going to operationalize our talk with you this morning or this afternoon, depending on your time zone. And we decided not to kind of handhold you through each chapter to give you a kind of an overview of each. We do have a summary document available on the website that you're welcome to review if you want kind of a high level overview of each chapter. I think Farah shared at the beginning, the toolkit is now live and on the site. You can actually download it in chunks because it ended up being, I think, a lot longer than we originally thought it might be. I think one of the pieces I did want to share is that there was and there continues to be an ongoing call for already developed workshops, modules, and facilitator toolkits. And we could have focused solely on developing educational workshops and programming. However, since we're advocating for developing evidence-based material, we knew that this project didn't have the capacity or the timelines available to us in order to do this work effectively. So we strategically didn't focus in on building a bystander workshop 101 or responding to disclosures workshop 101. There are projects in existence within the provincial level, and I think Nova Scotia, potentially New Brunswick, British Columbia has done some work within these areas, so those resources do exist. Instead, really, when Jen and I, actually back in the day, we met with Jay as well, met in Toronto in 2019 in person, we really decided to work towards building the foundations for post-secondary institutions to respond to the unique educational needs of their communities and build strong working blocks for educational programming to take root, to grow, to be evaluated in order to be able to understand what's working, what's not working, and where the opportunities to grow exist.
I have to say, as someone who's witnessed this toolkit, book, workbook, amazing grow. It's been so amazing to see it. And now, as you're talking about it, it really excites me to get into it. One thing I want to know, that brought me a lot of joy just to witness you two creating it. What brought the both of you joy when you're working on this? Because I don't know. I always think it's funny when we talk to other people who do gender-based violence work, we always say, oh, this is so joyful. And people are like, you find your work joyful? And we're like, yes, we do. So what brought you joy in making this?
Thanks for that question, Farah. Maybe we could ditch the slides and come back together and I can see your faces more fulsomely. Excellent, thank you. One of the pieces that I found that really actually helped provide me great joy in this project was also probably one of the things that scared me the most. Surprise, surprise. One of the things we really got to do over the last 2 years was work collaboratively with a number of community practices. And I know last spring, summer, we had a series of webinars where they got to present their toolkits. They also collaboratively helped us edit chapters of the toolkit. And for me, having them, the members of the community practice members, review and engage with the toolkit really brought me joy. Because oftentimes, I think Jen's alluded to the fact that we do this work in isolation, or it can feel like isolation, and to actually be in conversation with people in a document was quite thrilling. And I did a PhD, so when I get reviewed and edits on feedback, I'm often always like also scared when I read it. And then as I engage with it, I'm like, this is amazing. This is so good. And so I really also want to say hats off to the community's practice members who really pushed us to do better, to grow stronger, and to allow us to integrate some of your comments into the experience in each chapter. Because of this, I felt like I had a much stronger sense of community, and that this is collective work that we're doing. For me, it helped reduce some of the feelings of loneliness and isolation. And if I haven't said it enough already, working with Jenn has brought me joy. We were meeting once every few weeks to really support each other through this process. So it was kind of like writing a dissertation, but I got to write it with a whole community of folks. So thanks for that.
Oh my goodness, CJ, I just absolutely adore you. You know that. They just, for folks know, they've just been incredible throughout this process, and I really couldn't have done it without them. And we often have these conversations weekly because we're just like, we couldn't have done this. Like, it's a lot. We have a lot of big feelings, and just being able to cross share and learn from other folks, just echoing CJ, I learned so much from community. Like, I was like, oh, I'm not doing that right. Or like, I can add this to my thing. It was just incredible because I'd never been a part of something like that before. And getting to work with Farah as well. Farah actually came in at a time where we really needed somebody to help us trim and guide, and we were just kind of all over the place. And Farah spent, months with us going through it and reviewing and really holding us accountable to that. So it was really just like amazing to be a part of that. And I also got to work with incredible people like Jay Garcia, Wu, Selena, who's authored chapter 2 of the toolkit, or co-authored chapter 2, I should say, of the toolkit, and a huge chunk of it. And also the incredible graphic designers. I am just like in awe of their talent. Jay Bird, Kitty Rode, Bill Kiesmere, and Vito, like just blown away by the design work. And I hope other people can also appreciate it when they get to check out the toolkit, just how much love and labor was put into that. So I would say I love this question. I could keep going because I love joy, and I think we're all about that, but I'll pause there.
I love that you are naming how, although this does feel really isolating, it did feel really daunting as two people kind of to take on this giant task. You had all this amazing community around you to not only hold accountable to like the ideals and the hopes that we all have about this, but also bring in their own knowledge, their own understanding. And that design is a part of that conversation, that how we see what our work looks like, how we understand it is a part of what it can be, right? And what we can envision. So that to me is really exciting. I know you just talked about what brought you joy. I kind of also want to know what brought you pause, because I heard a little bit of pausing happening in this. So, what brought you pause even to step into a project like this, to put this out in the world? Because it's kind of like giving birth today of, a new project. So can you share a little bit about gave you pause?
What didn't know? Oh gosh, I think one of the things that really brought me pause is this project felt expansive. We could still be writing this. We could still be engaged with this work. This is lifelong work, and it should be. I think that's one of the clear lessons that I continuously learn as I do this work, is that this work is lifelong work. And as I mentioned, it felt expansive to engage with this toolkit. Jenn and I really had to set really clear boundaries for ourselves to, like that slide where you saw the thought bubble and the key suggestions, recommendations that came out of the original report. We continuously brought that back up and used that as our bumpers to keep us in line and focused as we wrote this chapter. Because Jenn and I have been doing education at post-secondary institutions, as have probably many of you on this call. And a core piece of our work tends to be developing the educational programming that's needed based on something that's happened. So a lot of times we're doing really responsive work. And this was not the intention of this tool. This tool is to kind of do the opposite, to flip the script and say, actually, we're going to do very intentional work so that we can build things out in really thoughtful ways, so that we have a structure to build and move on that's ever changing and ever evolving, but where are some good places to start? So that's what I really hope we've been able to develop for you all today. Like when you look at it, I hope you see the possibilities and don't feel too hedged in the way that Jenn and I kept ourselves hedged in. But yeah, the expansiveness was a piece that continuously brought me pause, and especially when COVID blew up and we had to move everything to online learning. Jenn and I were like, we should do this. And we're like, no, actually, we shouldn't. We actually have to develop some foundations first. And a lot of the topics presented in the toolkit are part of ongoing and existing conversations. So we struggled with what it looks like to be part of these conversations and how to bring GBV educators and best practices into this work. So in some ways, like, I would love to say I'm an assessment and evaluation expert. I was so pleased that Selena agreed to come in and collaborate with us on that chapter. Because it was through that I'm realizing that, yes, this work exists in the world, and how does it apply to our work? And so we took that and worked quite clearly alongside of Selena and really built out a workbook to help folks kind of like take pieces and think through other things. And Selena, I think I just saw a comment pop up on my screen from her, moved that chapter in such lovely ways that I think open up, for me at least, new possibilities to think about how to engage with this work. So I'm going to leave it like that and pass it to Jenn.
Yes, Selena, it's so good you're here. We're just so grateful for you. And I just wanted to kind of expand a bit on what CJ was saying. So something that we kept coming back to, and we had conversation with Farah about as well, is just the evolving needs of this work and how language is shifting, right? So things we might say now, we may not have said like, 2-3 years ago, or like there's new platforms, like there's different ways that we're engaging with students and with staff and faculty. And so I think we were trying to figure out like, how do we move from there and how do we make it applicable? And CJ mentioned this already, but I just feel the need to reiterate that often, and in my experience in prevention roles, is something happens on campus and then we need prevention. And then they circle back to me like, oh, we need this huge prevention, plan, or we need something in place. And it's like, actually, no, we should have had this in place. This should have been in place decades ago. We're working, against time in some ways. So in and throughout the toolkit, we're really advocating for a more sustainable approach to prevention, as opposed to one that's founded just in response. I also think one of the biggest things we struggled with and grappled with is what we're creating and what we're developing going to be outdated? So we were thinking like in 10 years, are people going to even know what this is? Does this make sense? And I think a prime example of that was during COVID, and we were writing the toolkit during the pandemic, which was challenging in of itself because we were working at home and writing this. But also we had our own individual campus work that we were doing as well at the same time. And so I remember in 2020, we had to shift all of a sudden everything to online. So, all the workshops, all your programming, just everything felt like a kind of, overnight just exploded. And now I have to be an expert in all these platforms, and I don't know how Zoom works, or how do I engage? I don't know how to, engage with people through online platforms. Like, what does that look like? And so there was a lot of questions about like, what does it mean for prevention work and challenges? And I think a lot of those are still unanswered as we're still in the pandemic and experiencing that. And thinking about questions like, how are we creating trauma-informed spaces online? How are we connecting with students who are in different time zones? Like, these are just some of the things that came up for me in my work. And there's just so much, I think, unknown still about that. And it creates a lot of problems. And I think people were looking to us, and I was kind of looking to myself and CJ being like, maybe we should create like a toolkit or a chapter on like online stuff. And then I don't know which one of it or who said it to me. They're like, no, it's like a hard no. And I was like, okay. So, long story short, we were trying to really build something like CJ's mentioned that's foundational. And our goal is that this will grow. It'll move, we'll add to it in 10 years, like it will build over time. And we will get to that place where those tools are developed. but we needed that foundation, right? We needed to build that before we could start building up, and that did not exist. So we really just try to stay with that boundary. And last, I'll just say that I think there was a lot of, are we getting this right? Is this going to land? Is this effective? Are people going to enjoy what we're saying? Are people going to relate? Is this reflective of the needs of the community? And just, there's a lot of unknown about prevention work and little research that affirms it, which can be really hard and when you're in those roles. So we hope that we're able to reflect and people are able to really relate and build from a place that feels right for them.
I feel so excited when I hear you speak about just how this can be moldable for different groups of people, right? Because campuses can be rural situations where it's a very small campus, it can be a remote, it can be in a really large urban center. So it's so different. And that's why it's so exciting about your tool, is that it is transferable into those spaces because people get to make what they want with it. And that's how I see people using that tool. How do you both see people using your tool? Or how do you vision people, how do you want people to implement it? Or how do you want people to run with it? How do you want people to make their own version of it? So what are you seeing right now with it?
I would say in terms of design, we really wrote it from a place of curiosity and really view it as a blueprint, or we call it choose your own adventure style. And that was Farah's idea, actually. Like, maybe we leave it up to the readers to kind of choose where they want to go. What chapters do we want to explore? And women throughout each chapter, you'll find we have a list of different curious questions that we created, interactive activities that are individual and group based. If you're working in a team setting, we've got worksheets, we've got resources, lots of testimonials, and our own experience as well. And so we really hope that each campus will draw upon the toolkit in ways that make sense to them. And we really wanted to meet people where they were at in their work, since we know that people in these roles are, over capacity, they don't have the space to build out this whole new program. We wanted to try to shape and mold it so that, I'm lacking in this area, I need some help and support. Well, here's a chapter that can really help and mold you and build on what you have already. And it's also great for people who don't have any prevention work in place. I think it's a good starting point. And I also think people who, sorry, I'm losing my footing here. I think I've said most of this. That's why I'm like, I've already kind of said this. But I would say, the last thing I would say is that in addition to being a resource, probably most importantly is that we see it also as a call to action for post-secondary institutions. I said this earlier, like, we are so overdue for this work. And I'm really tired of seeing all these things happen and us come back to the same resolution that we need prevention work. And so much is so focused on response and support. And we often just leave out this huge piece that really needs to be prioritized. So we hope that institutions also see this as like, hey, we wrote 300 plus pages, we could have written more. There's a real need to have this in place.
Thanks, Jen. You took the words right out of my mouth. I think for what's my vision for the toolkit and how it will be used is I hope folks find it of value and come into it as a tool of engagement and an opportunity to learn and grow, but not in isolation. Jen's going to talk a little bit about what's to come. But really, when I think about this toolkit, I do see it as a building block. And in 10 years, I can't wait to see what building blocks have been built upon this and what it looks like and how we've been able to move and change. I also hope people will use the toolkit as a way to share their work, to share their promising practices, to share, we do a lot of that in the toolkits as well, where we highlight, like McEwen has a really cool terms of reference, or I think Carleton University has I was looking at the Carleton University's Sexual Violence Advisory Committee's terms of reference just yesterday. I would love for us to share more that way. It's really valuable when those of us who are building something out have the ability to look to others to find out what the promising practices are. When at SFU, when we were doing our first ever policy review, I luckily had the collegial relationship with Farah to be able to tap her on the shoulder and say, hey, Farah, can you show me what your model was? And we were able to share. And it's in those moments that I really hope this toolkit helps to foster more of those relationships and opportunity for collaboration and growth, as well as acknowledgement. I think Farah's done some phenomenal work, and I really want to say thank you for lending your expertise in the things that you've grown over the years. You've really helped post-secondaries grow in that way. And I really hope this toolkit continues along the vein of that conversation. Also, I feel like GBV prevention is becoming a much more established role in post-secondaries because of mandated policies, because conversations like this are happening at provincial territorial levels and within the national context. And I'm excited for this toolkit to help a further professionalization of folks who are doing this work in post-secondary.
I think that what I get when I hear both of you is just how needed something like this is, and how much even creating this must have been a point for you to be like, this is the thing that I needed when I started out, when I started doing this work, but this is the thing we need now too, and how it's scalable and buildable and really bringing people together. What I appreciate about also hearing both of you is that the work to end gender-based violence cannot be done in a silo, that it needs both community, the work in the post-secondary, it needs everyone to come together, and not from a place of urgency all the time or scarcity, from a place of groundedness, so that we can move forward in a way that feels sustainable, so we don't get burnt out from the work too, which, is such a piece of many of us experience. I want to understand now, what's next? What's happening next? Because I know, Jenn, now you are full-time with Courage to Act, which is so exciting, and you're doing such amazing work. And I really want to hear, what are the amazing things? Because I'm already seeing from people are popping off in the chat about, how do I promote this? How do I be part of this? What do I do? So Jenn, share with us kind of what's next.
I'm so excited. I also have a slide, Farah, if we can. Awesome. There's sometimes just visually and auditory it works. Great. Yep. So I'm really stoked. We are offering kind of a number of exciting learning opportunities this year. One that's coming up really soon is the Community of Learning. So the Community of Learning, for those who aren't familiar, is a space for those who are engaged in campus gender-based violence work on campus. I think I said that. To meet monthly to explore kind of key themes in the toolkit, specifically Chapter 6, which is a workbook dedicated to gender-based violence educators, which is awesome. And I'm going to go back through it myself. So applications for that are actually open, and they will be closing, I think it's this Sunday, January 23rd. And we will pop a link into the chat as well for folks who want to apply to that space. And for those who are like, I want to kind of dig deeper, I want to explore some of these concepts, I want to do a kind of workshop style, we do have learning labs, which are really exciting, and they will be facilitated online. And they're really like hands-on type learning spaces for people to bring existing content with them. And we're going to explore and workshop ideas. And even if you don't have existing content, it's still a great place to connect and build out content that you're looking to have on your campus. Registration for that will be opening soon. And I am probably the most excited about our AllStar Summer School course. So this will be offered in June of this year, and it will be an online experiential course for gender-based violence educators. Those are working on campuses, and we're going to be exploring how to build action plans. What does that look like? How do we engage in that? And it will be over 3 half days in June, and of course virtually because of the pandemic. And last I'll just say is that we're continuing to build out our knowledge center. So folks have resources. If you're doing incredible work, we want to hear about it. We want to amplify the work that's happening, across coast to coast. And, we want to continue having a space where we can go to a website and all that information exists for us and all those resources. So stay tuned for more information on that. I believe Anuth placed perfect. Anuth's got the link in the chat there.
I personally am just excited about something called the AllStar it just feels so good to hear that. So already excited about it. But I think it's going to be such a great opportunity also to talk about the isolation, right? That Jenn, that you talked about, that idea of breaking isolation and be able to connect with your peers and learn from each other and always wanting to learn. I know CJ and I both are trying to convince Jenn to let us go to the AllStar event because we want to learn from Jenn. Hopefully Jenn will agree. But yeah, it looks so amazing. We're going to end the kind of conversation we're having here in a minute, but in terms of this part of it, but now we're going to move on to some questions. And we already have a question in the Q&A. So I'm going to ask both you and CJ, Jenn and CJ, to answer this. And then if there's more questions, please pop them out and I'm going to keep asking good questions. So this person says, I'm so honored to witness this conversation. I'm a TA and an anti-GBV frontline worker. And I'm wondering if you folks would be willing to touch on engaging with multiple skills at once within the toolkit. And how workers like myself can use this toolkit to educate student advocates and workers and the faculty I work in at the same time. I absolutely understand there are a min of responsibilities and task forces that are in place, but I see GBV prevention or the lack of it at my university starting in the classroom too. So really a question, like, it's not just about the educator, the person that's given that role. What about people are in an educator role as a faculty member, as someone who's teaching or someone in the education side?
I think that's a really wonderful question. Thanks for posing it. I mean, I think the tools that are really a part of the toolkit, and I think I'd almost want to have a conversation with you to see how we could massage different pieces to help support you in this important work. And actually, one of the pieces I want to turn your attention to is the Francophone Community of Practice developed two tools, and one of them is an evaluation tool. So they actually take kind of part of our chapter 2 and bring it to life with a real life evaluation exercise. And the reason why I'm talking about it is within that, they talk about the importance of having and hosting conversations about, in that context, sexual harassment, but how we do need to normalize conversations around what behaviors is acceptable and not within our communities. So I think it's worthwhile taking a look at this toolkit to see what might be woven into your practice, but also take a look at some of the community practices tools, because when you start bringing all of these pieces together, there's a much more fulsome web to lean into. And I'm also just like ideas in terms of where to look to for some really neat ways to engage pop to mind. So I also want to say, if you want to follow up with me with my email, it's cj_rowe@sfu.ca. I'll point you to some resources that are popping close to hand. But Jenn, did you have thoughts?
I couldn't agree more, CJ. And I think also I'll share my email at the end too for folks who are like, I want to learn more and talk more about this. We're happy to schedule some time to do that. But the only thing I'll add really is that when we were designing the toolkit, although it was really designed for people who are in those roles, I think it's going to reach a broader audience, and we really hope it does. And we've been having conversations with, organizations that are outside of post-secondary, and they're like, we're excited about this toolkit. And I think there's so much applicability in there, especially in chapter 1, we go over like, what are key concepts in prevention? Like, what is a socio-ecological model? Like, what does that mean? And we go through, and I think a lot of that can be applicable to sort of various different industries. And there's so many tools in there that are exciting that you can build on individually if you want to improve your practice. But I would also encourage you to review the communities of practice that CJ mentioned, the tools. In particular, if you're a TA, I think that's the person mentioned there, TA. There's one on navigating power dynamics and boundaries as a graduate student that might be of real interest. And I can actually go ahead and maybe pop that in the chat or the link. I think we've already linked the Knowledge Center, so you can explore there.
I love questions like that because it's true. Education doesn't just start in one place. It starts in so many different places and avenues. And this is kind of a next question that kind of builds on that. So my org is, not my org, but this question goes, my org is working on revamping our consent campaign. We work with student advocates, exclamation point. How can a toolkit like this support our work?
Well, I can jump in here, CJ. I think I'll echo what we just mentioned. I think you will find so many resources and tools within the toolkit that will be applicable. And as I mentioned, I was a student, and I think we also had our community of practice who were involved in student frontline work, and they reviewed it, and we've had a lot of different conversations about like, how does this apply to students who are doing this incredible work on campus? And so I think it's very applicable to them. And again, I'll invite you if you want to have a conversation, Farah and I or CJ about your organization in particular, we're happy to, but I would say just check it out. And I think you'll find a lot of really juicy things in there that will support your work.
I think one of the pieces that really comes to mind for me too, and I'm really glad Jenn went first, because I think about some of the core work that Jenn did around engaging with broader community to really take a strengths-based approach to prevention education build out and architecture. So there are pieces to think about when in consultation and in conversation with user audiences. The other piece too, and I want to say hats off to the student community of practice, whom Jenn has mentioned. They were part of the review of this toolkit, and they have created a couple of phenomenal toolkits themselves that might be worth taking a look at. And I think in all of the resource too, we point to different education modules or institutions that are doing good work in certain areas. So there are lots to piece together through there. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, the student toolkit is a phenomenal resource. If you haven't seen it, it contains stories of student leadership and advocacy across Canada, as well as tools themselves. Each one of them provided also a tool around student organizing and leading, which could be really inspirational and also just really exciting to read, because oftentimes, students will leave and then new students will come and start another project, and sometimes they don't get to build on each other. So this was a really amazing. I like to think about we leave maps, not monuments, like Kim Catrin Crosby talks about that. And I love that quote for myself, because that idea, and I feel like this educational toolkit is doing that too, where it's this idea of like, how do we build on each other's work? How do we kind of create more spaces for people to understand? And how do we open up the circle even larger to include more of us in this education conversation? I am so excited about your tool. I feel like it's going to be a really exciting opportunity for folks that are nerd out about this for 20 years like myself, and people are just starting out. And that's what's really exciting about it. And also a piece I want to say too is the opportunities that Jenn, you named, that people can continue to be involved. So the AllStar summer school project, the community learning opportunities that people are going to have. I want to thank both Jenn and CJ for your work here. Jenn, you came into this work as someone on the advisory committee. Both CJ and I were so blown away with the feedback that you provided consistently around this work, and Jenn's leadership on education in Canada. Having you part of this project has really shifted our understanding and built up such a strong tool. We could not have done this without you. And I'm so glad that you're a part of this project. And I'm so glad you're continuing with us. And CJ, your leadership throughout Courage to Act, but specifically with this conversation around education, the chapter you created in the original report that went out. I would tease CJ sometimes because I'd be like, you're writing a thesis at this point, because CJ gets so into it and they're so meticulous with their words and their integrity. It's so amazing to see that this toolkit has now come to life after so many conversations. The two of you created something that I hope that, I can see in the audience, people getting really excited on the chat. This is something that a lot of us want and need to excite us about our work and to keep going, and also creating a community where we can kind of gather together and ask questions of each other. So I want to say thank you to you both. I also want to thank the Courage to Act team. There's a lot of, as Jenn and CJ kind of alluded to, and names, of the illustrators, the designers, the people within the team that kind of put together logistics, from folks that do the operations to people like Anuth who do all kinds of different things, managing so many different pieces. So I want to thank you as well. I also want to thank the community that joined us today, because this project is built on the relationship we have with our community and is built with community. And so many people have been a part of building this project, from the people in the community of practice to the people that join Courage to Act, the people that write Courage to Act and say, I have this idea, and we're open to talking to Jenn or open to talking to CJ about the education initiatives that they're doing at their communities. You all inspire us. You keep this project going. And this is why this project is happening, because of your work. I want to make sure that we just also acknowledge that we're going to take care of ourselves today, because we just talked about gender-based violence. So do what you need to do. Make sure you had your lunch. Make sure if you're just having breakfast, whatever you need. And then we continue to work alongside each other, that this work is not about scarcity, this work is about abundance. And a toolkit like this is about building abundance, creating gardens together so that we can keep building this work and end gender-based violence. The goal is to lose our jobs. I want to also invite you that on February 2nd, we have another event that's really exciting I find it very exciting, about the foundations of standards for campus gender-based violence complaints. So actually, what ways can we move forward around standards to looking at investigations, to looking at complaint processes? And you can register on our National Skillshare website, webpage on courage2act.ca. Please share with your colleagues about this toolkit. Tell them how great it is. CJ and Jen have kindly offered their email addresses to talk to them more. Please nerd out with them and sign up for, the amazing education opportunities you have with Jen. I cannot say enough how amazing they're going to be and wonderful. And again, I want to thank everybody for joining us. This has been such a generative conversation. Jen and CJ, do you have any last words you want to name before we go? Last gestures of joy?
Farah, I would just want to thank you. My goodness, I acknowledge all your work in this too. You just have been like a shining light, and I know like it's sometimes we don't make that space, but I think CJ, if you want to jump in as well, just thank you so much for all your work. Everybody who knows me knows I'm emotional, so I have to keep it real short. I've just appreciated your mentorship and everything, and yeah, I'm gonna.
No, thanks. I want to thank everybody collectively who've been a part of the conversations that have brought us to this point. I'm really excited to see where things move and grow and shift and change. Thanks for being in conversation and in this work with us. We can't do it without you.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you to Wage again for their wonderful, generous support of this project. We could not do this without the funding from Women and Gender Equality Canada. So thank you, everyone. Take good care, reach out, say lovely things to each other, celebrate each other, and make sure that you share this amazing toolkit. We'll see you on February 2nd. Thanks, everyone. Take good care.